Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another show. For what is the first show a little bit with what's going on in the world right now, I think you can excuse a little bit of a hiatus with the lack of Arsenal-related news that is. But we are back diving straight back in with the Arsenal interviews. And I'm speaking to someone we haven't spoken to in a little bit. It's been a couple of years, but I'm absolutely enthralled to have him back on the show. And it's Mr. Graham Hunter. How are you doing, Graham?
Hi, TC. I'm doing fine. Thank you. It's kind of you to invite me.
No problem at all. Thank you for taking time out of your day. There's obviously the big sort of shadow over sport and the world right now, and that's sort of where I want to start, because with your links to La Liga and coverage of football in Spain and beyond, I wanted to sort of link to the news that La Liga have decided to postpone indefinitely, it seems, all of their football, and make the comparison between that and the Premier League. Why do you think the Spanish Federation and La Liga have taken that route compared to the Premier League just deciding to temporarily postpone matches?
Look, Tom, you'll have to stop me when I get boring or too intricate, but it's obviously like almost every answer regarding football, never mind right now. It's a lot more fragmented and a lot more complicated than that. I suspect that's why you've got a popular podcast, and maybe that's why people listen to the big interview, because we don't try and package things up in neat little globules of information and say it's like that. So, in all honesty, this total postponement of Spanish football isn't much ahead of England's not shut down, but announcement that for the foreseeable future there isn't going to be any football until at least the end of April. Now, Spain and Spain's football, in other ways, were significantly ahead of. You mentioned the Premier League, but I think, in all honesty, we have to start talking about countrywide and the entire football pyramid in the UK. So, the fragmented picture that I'm talking about would include the fact that I didn't prep this up because I didn't know we would speak about this specifically, but many days ago, and I would say, let me try and have a stab at it, Tom. Not long after their Europa League first leg tie, which was played in San Siro against Atalanta, Valencia shut down all work around the club that included extraneous people. They kept on training, but they shut down all media conferences, and that limited the amount of toing and froing around Paterna, their training ground, which is only about 25 minutes outside the city, and also Mestalla. Now, at that time, I won't hide that my level of knowledge about coronavirus and the speed of the pandemic and the ease of transmission meant that I wasn't alone in thinking this is a quite handy way for a slightly embattled club to close down media that have given them a relatively strenuous ride in recent weeks, and I think deservedly so, because you're educated enough in Spanish football to know that Valencia haven't simply been enormously erratic in their results and their level of performance. They turned in a handful of games which have been, beyond limp, and therefore I was in the wrong and Valencia were in the right. and we're talking, I guess, somewhere in the region of 10 days before Spain's national shutdown. And Spain's national shutdown came, we're about something like the 24th when we record, and that's a Tuesday minus 9 days, so that's the 15th. So I would estimate that somewhere around the 5th or 6th of March, Valencia said, we're really significantly changing how we behave. Now, they then became the first club to report mass positive testing for the virus. They said, again, in the region of 10 days ago, that 35% of their squad and staff had tested positive. At the moment, thank the Lord, we haven't had any further reports that any of those who are ill are in particular danger. I've not heard any reports that any of them are indeed, in need of hospital care. But they were, albeit that it was by force majeure, they were the first club in Spain to take this enormously seriously, because they'd been in Lombardy. The tie, obviously, because it was such a big tie for Atalanta, it was played at San Siro, and therefore this was miles and miles and miles ahead of when Atleti took well over 3,000 fans to Anfield in a match that now it looks ill-judged that it took place with travelling fans allowed to be there. And I'm using those as yardsticks to try and answer your question and show that within Spain, there's been a massive disparity in how clubs themselves and individual footballers themselves began to understand not just the severity of what was happening, but what they needed to do. And in that, I think La Liga, headed by Javier Tebas, and the Football Federation, headed by Luis Rubiales, an ex-footballer, the two men not only don't get on, it's like a continuous episode of Tom and Jerry. And they are still publicly taking snipes at each other, but the two bodies have worked together reasonably well to, first of all, say that there would be some closed-door games, and one of the last big games to take place would have been Real Sociedad going to Eibar in a local derby, which they won. It was the game in hand, which was cancelled because there'd been local contamination from pollution leaks, and therefore those poor two sides had to play football when they should have been pretty much on lockdown. But they played. La Real won. They shot up into the Champions League places or at or around, and therefore, from that point onwards, there was a 2-week suspension of football, and then that was followed through because that was a provisional. At that stage, there was no promises from La Liga, who have been, I would say, decent in their actions, only moderate in their communications.
That has a lot of bodies, in fairness.
Yeah, I would say that La Liga still rank ahead of the football authorities in Britain, because I think, if you want to get things the right, well, if you have to imbalance, it's probably more important to be correct and alert in your actions rather than your communication. It'd be lovely if they were equally good. But Tom, the truth is that we never expected there to be anything other than a massive extension of the initial 2-week suspension. And then I'll finalize by saying to you, I personally have been enormously, and I mean enormously, impressed by the way in which a wide variety of football clubs have stoked up their social media, with really blanket coverage of this message of stay at home, flatten the curve. And that's not, I'm not being in any way critical of La Liga. I actively want to praise a huge variety of clubs who've been extraordinarily proactive and intelligent and communicative about saying, tapping on the fans' loyalty, say, we urge you to stay in your house. We urge you to obey the government decree. We urge you to understand, flatten the curve. We urge you to support our health service by not being self-indulgent and causing strain like we've seen in Italy. And this has been a repetitive message, brilliantly delivered, sometimes using text, sometimes using video, almost always asking players and managers to participate. And then there have been various episodes of, clubs putting their fitness training online. Clubs have been communicating to their fans, look, the players are staying at home and we're sending them food, or we're sending them instructions, or we're sending them equipment, and all of this, I think, adds to the what do you call it, the tableau
Chaos.
the tableau of information which needs to reach a diverse population in terms of ability to understand, in terms of age, in terms of attitudes, and again in a geographical area vastly bigger than the UK. So I think that overall, football in Spain thus far has come out of it not only extraordinarily well, but if I'm honest, a little bit better than might have been expected, given that during the season, I think we can all legitimately say that they occasionally, whether it be the Federation or La Liga, they occasionally tie their own laces together and then fall over. You know that. I mean, I still think that they're a little bit ill-judged sometimes, but they certainly have modernization to do. Yet, in this crisis, broadly, and I do not mean without exception, I do not mean that, but broadly, I think they've been exceptionally good, and my admiration for those who run clubs from the point of view about how do we communicate with the people who are interested in us. Broadly, I think they've been above and beyond measure.
Yeah, no, I think that when you look at how La Liga reacted in comparison to the Premier League, and we touched on that it is the communication of not just the federations, but the clubs too, that you touched on. And one thing that I feel like I can praise Premier League clubs for doing is maybe not necessarily communication-wise, but trying to get in touch with the younger generations as well. Because for me, and obviously speaking as a teacher, I know how stubborn some young people can be, and trying to keep them inside when all they want to do is go out and see their friends is tricky. But the way that they're putting on, and sometimes in quite comical ways as well, with their Twitter feeds, for example, that I feel like the Premier League is doing more of that. But it is the organisation and communication of La Liga, which, as you mentioned, I think has definitely superseded that we've seen in England.
I just want to make the point again, Tom. With you said of La Liga, I mean within La Liga. I think La Liga as a body have been shrewd enough in the actions that they've enforced. But I'm talking about individual clubs.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think that when you're looking at I was mentioning about the clubs in the Premier League, that's where my praise goes. So that sort of mirrors, as you were saying, then about the clubs in Spain, and it's the communication from up top where we've seen a lot of criticism coming out more and more so. Linking then,
Tom, I don't want to be gratuitous here, but you've asked me. We know each other reasonably well, at least through social media and messages exchanged, and we've got several points of reference between us. So I want to say to those who are listening to you that it's my opinion that the Premier League in general really made a severe misstep, and it's not massively out of context with either the government or the way in which people are behaving across, the British Isles. In that, what resonated, it's not just because it was co-written with a friend, Johnny Northcroft, but when Wayne Rooney talked about feeling like guinea pigs and feeling like footballers have been the last to be thought of and been treated as a commodity, there was a drive to continue football in the Premier League long after, and I admitted my mistake when in very early March, I felt that Valencia had possibly been a little bit clever in taking advantage of what was going on to say, "Oh, we're shutting down all media." I accept that they were right and I was wrong. But many days later, the Premier League was still proposing, and it is a valid point, until Mikel Arteta reported a positive test. They were still proposing to play
the Brighton game,
on the final weekend. They were. I mean, it was very nearly going to be a full program. Now that was outright
ridiculous,
wrong, and it was out of step. And there was, without any question, sufficient information for them not only to understand that it would have been the wrong thing to do, but that they would have been culpable for a mass congregation of people which would have undoubtedly, in my mind, undoubtedly helped the chances of this pandemic spreading within England minimum, but Britain, and there's vast numbers of people come over from Scandinavia and Asia for the Premier League, and I personally think that they were extremely ill judged, and I have to look. It's worth using the word. There's no point in me pricking about. It was irresponsible.
Yeah, it was 100%. Moving past that shadow and trying to somehow put our minds into actual football. If we rewind before this chaos really sort of kicked off into January, listening to your podcast, The Big Interview, which listeners, if you haven't checked out, you definitely should. I'll leave a link to it in the description. Is the links with Aubameyang and Barcelona. I'm of the opinion I've basically come to terms with the fact that the Gabonese board isn't going to be an Arsenal player for very long. With a year left on his deal, I knew that there'd be instances and opportunities that might see him look to find where the grass is greener. But on your show, you mentioned about how he had contacted, and the way it came across on the show, that he had personally contacted people that were in the know at Barcelona to sort of sound them out and say that
I'll clarify. I'll clarify. That was really close, and it may be that I misexplained, because that was extremely close. I'll bear the bones, Tom. But just by fluke, I was coming home from a big interview series in the UK, and I bumped into a friend of mine who knows Auba and has worked with him and had spent the previous day with him. And what emerged was that Barcelona had been in touch in a way that he knew he was on a list. And the context for that needs to be that they knew at this stage that coming out of the closed transfer window, they were going to be given at this stage they knew that they were going to be without Luis Suarez, and Dembele was out, and they were working out how to replace, whether they wanted to replace then for the long term, or whether they wanted to replace in a way that would tide them over. And they had a beauty parade. They went through the various different options. And I think that they thought that with Raul Sanllehi still important in how Arsenal functions. And I think they thought that with Aubameyang patently not looking like trophies are anything like a distinct possibility at Arsenal at the moment, and given his age and his contract status, they wanted to work out whether he was interested, what the cost would be, and it was one of these exercises. In tabloid terms, people call it tapping up, but if we're all brutally honest, every club that wants to make a move, every agent that wants to manufacture something, every player that is aware of his status, everybody is reaching out feelers all the time. And what you were, very close to representing exactly what I understand happened was that Aubameyang was prepared enough that if the move was to happen, he wanted to understand what life in Barcelona was like. Okay. Not like, do they eat paella and is it sunny? But is it the right move for me? He wanted to understand conditions at the club, the mood at the club, and I think for my way of understanding, for my beliefs based on what I've learned about footballers and clubs during the years I've been writing since '89, it's he was conducting the proper due diligence, even if in theory the rules say it shouldn't be happening. And let's just be grown up and say that, almost every transfer move between any club and any player, any two clubs and any player, is pre-X-rayed, and when they're not, they usually end up in disaster.
Yep.
And at that stage, I'm certain he knew that he was no more than an option. And not only did that market close, but when Dembele was ruled out for 6 months, my understanding is that Barcelona could only sign within Spain, and therefore it was Braithwaite. But the wintertime market was a moment in which they knew that they needed more goals. They ultimately discarded Aubameyang, and now I'm into the realms of saying I suspect they discarded him for cost and age, because Barcelona are not well off financially. The previous bits I was telling you, I take to be absolute fact. The reason for them discarding it and for Quique Setién saying it's brilliant, the new signing this winter is going to be Dembele when he's fit, and of course no sooner was he back in training that he broke down completely again, and the tendon, which has been one of his sources of trouble, has ruptured completely, and therefore he's not expected to play football again until June. So that's what I understand to have happened with Aubameyang, and I think Barcelona would have been inept if they hadn't thought about, just that decision tree, the domino theory forward. If we decide to sign for big money now and buy somebody who's going to last us for 2.5 seasons, and that was one of their options, then if they hadn't been sending out Aubameyang and Arsenal, then it would have been infantile.
Yeah, I really, I can't. Basically, I get into a lot of arguments with Arsenal fans about it, because arguments is probably too strong, but debates, heavy debates, especially on Arsenal's Twitter sphere these days.
Yeah.
Because I'm okay with it. And I'm sorry for keeping you slightly past time. When we'll wrap up very, very shortly.
No, it's okay, Tom.
Yeah. I'm very okay with the idea of Aubameyang moving on. I don't know if that's a very medieval feeling of this player doesn't want to play for my team, or it's not that he doesn't want to play for my team, but this player is open to the idea of leaving. So therefore, I'd rather someone who was more committed to playing for Arsenal. That makes me, and as we already mentioned, the age and the price that we could ultimately recoup nearly all of the fee were he to go. But from what you're saying there, do you think now that the time has passed for the idea that Aubameyang
for Barcelona, Tom, for Barcelona, I'd be shocked, rigid, if there was any more activity between them and Aubameyang,
right,
for several reasons. One, they are brutally short of financial resources, and it's obvious that with each passing week that goes without football, the harder that position gets. Secondly, they are torn between what I think will be an all-out effort to get Neymar back, to complement Messi, to please Messi, because they still believe that Neymar is potentially the world's number one attacker. I think that's I think that's an enormous risk, given his physical condition, his penchant for injuries, his behaviour. But that's just a personal point of view. And Lautaro Martinez, who is clearly not a footballer of the same caliber as Neymar, not even a very similar footballer at all. But they believe that Luis Suarez's constant public urging of them to put another striker, and his constant point that he's told the club privately, he says, and he said this publicly, so they could have discredited it if they wanted to, but he has twice now in the last 6 months said, I've been warning Barcelona for a couple of seasons that they must buy another number 9, and I welcome the challenge, because it's clear that in terms of age, weight, acceleration, away goals in the Champions League, injury record, Luis Suarez is well into the winter of his career. So how they negotiate those deals and which one they choose, because I don't believe they've got the money for both, in my opinion, and then you've got in my opinion, means that Auba is not an option given age and cost, and then you have to throw in the complication of, are they keeping Griezmann, who wants to stay, or will they try and use Griezmann to get Neymar, or do they use this Andy Webster clause that took place between Wigan and Hearts to try and basically rip Neymar out of Paris Saint-Germain and then let tribunals figure out a compensation fee rather than a transfer fee. Barcelona's dealings in summer, if the transfer market becomes a realistic thing, if it exists, if movement of people, never mind transfers of footballers, is even within the bounds of imagination by summer. These are so many variables, Tom, that I couldn't predict to you how it will end up with Barcelona next time a season starts equipped up front. But their intention is that it's at least one of the two men I've mentioned, and therefore the possibility of Aubameyang with a proper market for him. And with Arsenal, I back what you said, and I'll tell you something that Alex Ferguson isn't very famous for saying, but he once told a friend of mine who was interviewing for a book that he reckoned that one of his great recipes for sustained success was that often other managers would screw up, and therefore that as long as it's like a percentage golfer, and he wasn't downplaying his genius, he was adding an X-ray to what made him great, that he was inordinately addicted to making big decisions hard and quick, and therefore allowing other people, other clubs, other managers, other agents, footballers to dither, to worry about the consequences, and then to make a half shot. So you don't know if you're pitching for the back of the green or the front of the green. What you end up is in the bunker. And Arsenal are in that position with Aubameyang. And I, my honest opinion, although I will admit you didn't ask it, is that hard and fast is the way to proceed with him. And that includes either saying, Auba, even at your age, resign because we're building around you. Here are the people we're bringing you. We're not going to convince you by doubling your wages or giving you empty promises or saying, isn't Mikel Arteta better for the club and isn't the atmosphere better than it? Here are the people that we will bring you in order to make this team trophy capable. Stay. Or, like you advocated, thanks, fella. If you're not re-signing now, then we'll sell you in the summer. Tell your agent to go and find a club. And I think as long as the approach is one or other of those two, then it's not only legitimate, but it's where both Arsenal and your striker are right now in their lives.
Hard and fast is not two words that I would use to describe Arsenal's organisation, personally. But hopefully we can see whether the summer comes around or not. So, I mean, as you said and alluded to, I can't see football returning anytime soon at the moment. But when it does, fingers crossed, that we do see a change of heart. But a lot of people will tell me that I am clutching at straws with that statement. It's been an absolute pleasure, Graham, to speak to you once again, I have to say.
TC, anytime. We share ideas and values about football and its stories. So I really wish you more enjoyment and more optimism from your club, which clearly there's been a pickup on since Arteta was appointed. I think that until the club takes vibrations downwards from its owner, and until your de facto owner begins to care about the club having a cutting edge, then I think it's something of a distant prospect, even though it's patently clear that the day-to-day work is stiffer and more intense, and that there's been a benefit from it. I think that it's absolutely vital that that the ethos of the club is clearer and harder nosed and more trophy aggressive, and that comes from the States to North London. But I'm also really sad that I think it's a shroud that you're still left with from so many years of Arsene saying top four is a trophy. But that's for another day. I genuinely wish you better football, better defending, more tackles won, and more fun.
Thank you very much, and I wish you and those close to you the utmost health in this time ahead, and I'm sure our listeners do too. But yes, it's always a somber note to end on, thinking about Arsenal's times at the moment, but something that will linger in the minds of Arsenal fans for sure as we go ahead in this era of uncertainty. You can find Graham on Twitter at Bumper Graham, and of course his fantastic podcast, The Big Interview, where he's interviewed a plethora of different talents, both on the field and off. So I hope you go and check that out. We will see you again very, very soon. If you've enjoyed the video, can you please drop a like on it, and of course subscribe if you're new to the channel. See you very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.